I realized that there is no documentation for Qaffeine, so today I'm going to walk through what it takes to set up a Qaffeine project, how to write an extended CSS style sheet, how to parse that into CSS and JavaScript, and then hopefully I can also go out and write some documentation for it as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a directory for us to work in. Once I go in here, I'm going to install Qaffeine. Now, while this installs, I'm going to go ahead and create some files. Let's create one called compile-stylesheet.js. This is just downloading Chromium. We're going to use a headless web browser to parse out the extended styles from a CSS style sheet and return a regular CSS file as well as a regular JavaScript file that will do everything that we expressed in our input style sheet. I'm also going to create a folder here called dist and one called source. And in source, I'm going to create a new file called input.css. In dist, I'm going to create a file called index.html. And so now I think I have everything that I need to start. So in index.html, I'm just going to create a default template here. I'm going to link in output.css as well as output.js, and these are going to be the files that are generated by Qaffeine for us. We're not actually going to be loading input.css in our final document. I'm going to create some dummy HTML here. And that will give us something that we can work with. So here, just to make sure that we know that it's going to be working, I'm going to add a default style here. It's going to change the background to yellow if that works. So here we need to bring in Qaffeine that we installed with npm, and then we're going to run Qaffeine, and the things that it needs are the plugins, as well as the input CSS style sheet, the output JS style sheet name, and the output CSS style sheet name. So this is sitting in source input.css, and we're going to write it to dist output.js and dist output.css. So now I'm going to run compile-stylesheet.js with Node, and if that worked, here we have output.css with this rule, and there should be nothing in output.js because we haven't written any rules that are extended by JavaScript yet. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to write something with, let's use a parent selector. So now I'm going to do npm install Jsn Css parent selector. So we can import that here. And then I'm going to pass this in just by typing parent. So we have grabbed this from npm, we've imported it as parent, and we're going to pass it to Qaffeine as a rule plugin named parent. Now, we could do something like this and give it a custom name and use that name in our style sheet. And so in this case, I want to call it parent, so I'm putting parent there. So now let's load up our HTML. It was dist index.html. We see our pale yellow background is being passed through as it should be. So what do we have? We can grab the parent of an li, which would be the ul in this case and the ol in this case. That would be these here. So if we grab the parent of that, it's the ul, and the parent of this is the ol. So let's go ahead and try that. Unfortunately, you can't write something like this in CSS. That just doesn't work. So what we have to do instead is type _parent, which runs this rule here through our parent Jsn Css parent selector plugin, and that is expecting a CSS selector list, which in this case includes just the selector for the li tag, and it includes this declaration list, which will apply to all matching elements. Now, because it's a parent plugin, it's not actually going to target the li, but it's going to target the li's parent with these styles. So let's go ahead and compile that. Oops, installing that again. We're going to recompile the style sheet, and now we're going to see if the ul and the ol have the border that we just added because they're parent. If we remove this and just have an empty selector list, that's like having an asterisk there. That is going to target the parent, any tag that's a parent. So basically everything except for the bottom of each tree of elements. And if we looked for the parent of the body tag, that would be the HTML tag. If we're looking for the parent of the h1, which here it would just be inside the body, then instead of the HTML tag, it's the body tag that's the parent. So basically any of these Jsn Css plugins that are on NPM, you can use to extend regular CSS style sheets pretty easily. Let's create another demo here. I'm going to give them a little default style. I'm going to install Jsn Css Element Query plugin. And we're going to write an element query now, which looks a little bit different. So now that that's installed, we can import it in our JavaScript file. So I'm going to name it element. We're going to pass it in here. So as you can see, this is the auto-generated output.js, and it has JavaScript in here now because there are JavaScript-powered styles in our input CSS. So it has included the Jsn CSS pattern, which goes to here. Then, because we used one plugin, it's including the parent selector plugin. So that is the code in JavaScript that we need in order to target the parent of another element and apply those styles to it. In a second here, when we recompile, including the element query plugin, we're going to see two plugins being output here. And then right now, there's only one JavaScript-powered style rule in here. So there's only one rule being powered by Jsn CSS using that plugin. That's going to change in a second here. So I'm going to recompile that. We're going to look at this page now that it has these input elements. And we're going to write an element query that targets these elements and sets a responsive breakpoint on them, but not based on the browser viewports with, it's going to be based on properties that these input elements themselves have. So for this one, we're going to use a custom @supports rule, and we're going to use that element plugin that we passed in as a style sheet plugin to Qaffeine. I'm going to say we're going to target the input elements, and we're going to say min characters 5. So inside this, I'm going to write a selector starting with a double dash for self, which is going to refer to, so this style sheet is going to be copied into the document for each input element, each element matching this selector list that we passed in, and when this condition is true. So if we just put something in here like body, then when any input element was true, that's going to have effect on the body. But if you want to target the actual element that you're testing itself, you use a custom selector here, because it might be the case that in the document we have more than one input tag, but maybe not all of them meet this condition at the same time. So I'm going to say background lime. We're going to recompile that. And so now this is going to be something that CSS cannot do, but JavaScript can do. And so we've expressed it in valid CSS and used JavaScript to read that. That's what Qaffeine is. And then it's written for us. So now you can see in here there's also that element query plugin that we just grabbed. And in addition to our original rule here written for parent, it has now parsed this second rule that we put, the @supports rule, into a call to this element function with the selector, the conditions, and the group body rule that we had used. So let's test this out. Let's see if we get a lime green background when the condition is met. So there we go. So that is how you can use Qaffeine to read valid CSS style sheets, such as this one, which include extended selectors, like this rule, or extended @supports rule, like this one, how you can output the JavaScript-powered rules as a JavaScript file that can be run, and pass through all the regular CSS untouched to an output CSS style sheet, how you can load the two output files in your document, and then use CSS extended by JavaScript in the browser. I think that covers pretty much everything I wanted to show. So thank you for watching.